The spoon that refused to stir. Prologue: the library without books. In a town that had no name, or perhaps too many names to remember, there stood a library. It was not a library of books, nor of scrolls, nor of words carefully inked on paper. No. This was a library filled with objects. On its shelves, instead of volumes and tomes, rested cups, and hats, and umbrellas, and spoons. The shelves stretched high, higher than the tallest man could reach, filled with ordinary things, placed carefully, silently, as if they had always been there, and would always remain. The spoons sat quietly, lined up in rows, their metal catching the faint glow of the single lamp that never flickered, but never quite shone. Among them was a spoon. A silver spoon, slightly bent, its handle curling in a way that made it seem thoughtful, or perhaps just tired. This spoon had stirred soups, and teas, and broths. It had stirred in cups, stirred in pots, stirred in bowls. It had stirred until stirring felt like the only thing it knew. But one morning, or what the library called morning, when the lamp hummed a little brighter, and the dust floated a little slower, the spoon thought, "I will not stir again." And no one heard it, because no one needed to. The spoon settled deeper into the shelf, leaned ever so slightly against a teacup, and watched. Watched the empty shelves across the room, watched the dust float lazily through the warm, still air, watched the librarian, a man without a name, or perhaps too many names to fit on a name tag, as he paced between the rows, not looking for books, but looking for something else, though even he wasn't sure what. The librarian's steps made a soft, gentle sound, as if he were walking on words no one had spoken yet. The spoon's reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of a nearby jar, and in that quiet, between the librarian's footsteps and the silent sigh of the shelves, the spoon made a new decision. "I will write a diary," it thought. And though it had never held a pen, and though no ink had ever touched its silver surface, the spoon knew, somehow, that its diary would begin that very day. The diary would not be written with letters, nor with ink, nor with paper. It would be written in the quiet, in the moments between moments, in the space where stirring used to be. And its first entry would be simple: "Today I did not stir." It was a good day. Chapter 1: The Spoon's Decision. The spoon sat still, its silver surface catching the faintest reflections of the library's light, which wasn't quite a light, but more of a glow that hadn't decided whether to shine or simply exist. It thought again, slowly, like a thought that had to climb a small hill before arriving, "I will not stir. Not today. Not tomorrow. Perhaps never again." And in the space where stirring used to be, there was now a quiet, a calm, a soft pause that stretched across the shelf. The teacup beside the spoon gave a gentle clink, as if clearing its throat, though cups had no throats to clear. "Why won't you stir?" the teacup asked, its voice soft, like steam rising from forgotten tea. The spoon didn't turn, didn't shift, didn't shimmer. "I've stirred enough," the spoon replied, its words more thought than sound. "I've stirred when I was asked. I've stirred when I wasn't. I've stirred because stirring seemed to be all there was." The teacup tilted ever so slightly, enough for a thin layer of invisible liquid to glisten along its rim. But without stirring, the teacup wondered aloud, "What will you do?" The spoon thought again, letting the thought drift, float, settle. "I will watch," it said. "I will listen. I will write a diary." The teacup was silent for a moment, as if stirring a reply inside itself, but finding none. Finally, it said, "I hope your diary has sugar." The spoon almost smiled, but spoons do not smile. Not exactly. Instead, it leaned a little further back, resting against the shelf's cool wood, its curve reflecting a world that wasn't quite there, and wasn't quite not. And in its invisible diary, the spoon wrote its second entry: "Today I watched. I listened. I did not stir. It was a quiet day." Outside the library, though outside was only a word in the librarian's notes, something shifted. Or maybe didn't. And inside, the spoon stayed still, its not stirring stretching softly into the afternoon, which may have been morning, or evening, or simply a time with no name. Chapter 2: The Teacup's Question. The teacup sat quietly beside the spoon, its porcelain surface catching faint patterns of dust, like tiny clouds that refused to settle. It tilted again, slowly, as if testing how far it could lean without spilling something that wasn't there. "I've been thinking," the teacup said, its voice soft, like a memory of warmth. The spoon did not move. It had grown fond of not moving. "Yes," the spoon replied, after a pause long enough to grow moss. "If you won't stir," the teacup continued, "then what am I for?" The spoon thought, and the thought was wide, like a field stretching past where the eye could see. "You can still hold tea," the spoon offered gently. "But no one pours tea," the teacup replied, looking toward the empty shelf above, where no kettle had ever sat, but always seemed just about to appear. "True," the spoon agreed. The silence between them stretched, soft and full, like a blanket no one remembered folding. The teacup sighed, though it wasn't clear how a cup could sigh, and in its sigh was a question, and in that question was a longing. "Perhaps," the teacup said at last, "perhaps I could be something else." The spoon turned its reflection gently toward the teacup, its curve holding a quiet sort of wonder. "What would you like to be?" the spoon asked. The teacup paused, as if the answer were sitting somewhere just out of reach, on a higher shelf, or tucked behind an unseen book. "A hat," the teacup said softly. "I think I'd like to be a hat." The spoon considered this, letting the idea swirl gently, not stirred, but floating. "A hat," the spoon echoed, and in its diary, written in the quiet between thoughts, it added another line: "Today the teacup wished to be a hat." It was an unusual day. Outside the library, though outside was a place no one had ever seen, the wind paused, as if waiting for something. Inside, the spoon and the teacup sat still, and the shelves settled deeper into their silence, holding stories that had never been told, and perhaps never would. Chapter 3: The Hat's Dream. High on the top shelf, where the dust gathered in quiet corners, there rested a hat. It was an old hat, though no one knew how old, and no one asked. The hat had sat there for as long as anyone could remember, which wasn't very long, since no one really kept track of time in the library. From its perch, the hat watched the teacup and the spoon below, and listened to their quiet words, drifting upward like whispers carried by invisible breezes. "I would like to be a teacup," the hat said one day, its voice dry, like pages that had never been turned. The teacup looked up, its rim glinting faintly in the soft, uncertain light. "Why a teacup?" the teacup asked, sounding a little surprised, though not very surprised. The hat sighed, a deep, slow sigh, like the settling of old fabric. "Because a teacup is filled," the hat explained, "and I have been empty for a very long time." The spoon listened, its reflection shimmering faintly on the polished wood of the shelf. "And if you were filled?" the spoon asked gently. The hat thought, and the thought took time, stretching across moments that felt like quiet rain. "Then I might feel useful," the hat answered softly. The teacup tilted again, and a tiny invisible drop slid down its side, disappearing into nothing. "You can borrow my emptiness," the teacup offered kindly. The hat considered this, then shook itself very slightly, as if shaking off dust no one could see. "No," the hat said, "it must be my own." And so the hat remained on its shelf, dreaming quietly of being a teacup, wondering what it might feel like. To hold something warm, something gentle, something waiting. In its diary, the spoon wrote, "Today the hat wished to be a teacup." The teacup offered its emptiness. The hat declined. It was a thoughtful day. Outside the library, though outside was only an idea, a soft breeze passed by, carrying a scent of forgotten flowers. Inside, the hat dreamed, and the shelves leaned a little closer, as if listening. Chapter 4: The Umbrellas Speak. On the lowest shelf, tucked beneath rows of silent spoons and thoughtful cups, rested the umbrellas. There were many of them, their handles leaning gently together, their folded fabric whispering softly with each invisible breeze. None had ever been opened. None had ever felt rain. And yet, they spoke of rain. As if it were a memory shared among them, passed from one curve to another, like a secret told in the dark. "I once felt a drop," said a small red umbrella, its voice bright and eager. The others turned their silent attention toward it, though umbrellas could not really turn, and did not need to. "Tell us," whispered a tall black umbrella, its handle polished smooth by the passage of nothing. The red umbrella paused, remembering something it had never known. "It was cold," it said, "and it rolled down my side, and then it was gone." The other umbrellas sighed, a chorus of fabric shifting softly, like pages turning in a forgotten book. "Was it rain?" asked a yellow umbrella, its color faded, but its hope still bright. The red umbrella thought, and thought, and thought again. "I don't know," it admitted at last. The black umbrella nodded, or gave the sense of nodding, and spoke in a low, careful tone. "Perhaps it was a tear," it suggested. The yellow umbrella shivered gently. "A tear?" it asked. "Yes," the black umbrella said. "Maybe the teacup cried, and a drop found its way here." The umbrellas fell quiet again, each folding more tightly into itself, each holding a question without an answer. The spoon listened from its shelf above, its reflection curving softly over the edge of the wood. And in its diary, written in the hush between thoughts, the spoon added another line: "Today the umbrellas remembered rain." Or perhaps a tear. It was a wishful day. Outside the library, though outside remained only an idea, a breeze stirred dust that had nowhere to go. Inside, the umbrellas dreamed of rain, and the shelves pressed closer, as if waiting. Chapter 5: The Nameless Librarian. The librarian walked the aisles slowly, his footsteps soft, as if each step were placed gently between the lines of an unwritten story. He carried no books, for there were no books to carry, only shelves filled with objects that seemed to watch him with quiet, patient eyes that they did not have. He paused beside the row of spoons, his gaze lingering on the silver one, the one that no longer stirred. He did not speak, for there was nothing to say. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a choice that needed no explanation. The librarian moved on, passing the teacup, which tilted politely as he walked by. He paused again beneath the tall shelf, looking up at the hat. The hat remained still, dreaming silently of being a teacup. The librarian's lips curved slightly, a smile that wasn't quite a smile, and he continued his quiet journey. He stopped last at the umbrellas, leaning over them, listening. He heard nothing, and yet everything. Perhaps they spoke of rain, or perhaps they dreamed of clouds, or perhaps they simply waited. The librarian straightened, looked around the vast room, and sighed a sigh that felt like the turning of a page no one had written. He returned to his desk, a small table with no papers, no ink, no pen. He sat down, folded his hands, and stared at the space in front of him, as if seeing something invisible, or remembering something he had never known. And though he had no name, or perhaps too many names to hold at once, he felt whole. The spoon, from its shelf, watched the librarian, and in its diary, written in the silent corners of the day, it added another line: "Today the librarian walked." He listened. He smiled. It was a quiet day. Outside the library, though outside was still only an idea, the breeze paused, as if waiting for the next word. Inside, the librarian closed his eyes, and the shelves leaned in, holding their secrets a little closer. Chapter 6: The Day Without Stirring. The day unfolded slowly, like a blanket being pulled across a bed no one had slept in. The spoon remained still, its curve catching the faint light, reflecting shadows that did not belong to anything. It watched the teacup, which now wore the hat gently on its rim, balancing it carefully, as if the hat had always belonged there. The hat hummed softly, a melody without words, without tune, without beginning or end. The teacup tilted slightly, adjusting the hat, its balance delicate, its purpose uncertain. The umbrellas whispered beneath them, sharing stories of rain they had never felt, telling each other tales of clouds they had never seen, dreaming of storms that might never come. The librarian walked once more between the shelves, his hands clasped behind his back, his steps measured, gentle, like the ticking of a clock that had no numbers. He paused at each object, nodded softly, then moved on, leaving no footprints, no echoes, only quiet acknowledgement. The spoon watched it all, its reflection curved and small, holding pieces of the day, like drops of light that could not be poured. And in its diary, written not in ink but in stillness, the spoon added a new line: "Today I did not stir." The teacup wore the hat. The hat hummed. The umbrellas whispered. The librarian nodded. It was a peaceful day. Outside the library, though outside remained only a distant idea, the breeze slowed, as if waiting for something it could not name. Inside, the day rested quietly on the shelves, folded between the objects, between the spaces, between the pauses, and the spoon stayed still, content. Chapter 7: The Spoon's Dream. That night, or what the library called night, the spoon dreamed. It dreamed it was stirring again, but not in tea, not in soup, not in anything that could be named. It stirred stars, swirling them gently across a sky that felt both vast and close, as if the universe had folded in on itself, just to fit inside the spoon's curve. The stars moved slowly, like tiny lights reluctant to follow, and yet they danced, spinning softly under the spoon's quiet guidance. Below, the teacup balanced the hat, and the hat overflowed with starlight, pouring silent beams onto the shelves, onto the librarian, onto the umbrellas, which opened at last, catching the falling light like raindrops that glimmered and vanished. The librarian stood still, his face tilted upward, his eyes reflecting constellations no one had named. The teacup sang a lullaby, though it had no voice, and the hat hummed along, its brim glowing gently. The umbrellas spun slowly beneath the starlight, twirling in a quiet circle, their handles tracing patterns on the floor that no one could read, but everyone understood. And as the spoon stirred the sky, it felt a deep softness inside itself, a quiet joy, a fullness that needed nothing more. In its dream, the spoon wrote a line in its diary, a line that shimmered across the stars. Tonight I stirred the sky. The teacup sang. The hat glowed. The umbrellas danced. The librarian watched. It was a luminous night. Outside the library, if outside existed at all, the breeze carried the faintest echo of a song that had never been sung. Inside, the spoon dreamed, and the shelves leaned closer, holding the dream gently, so it would not fall. Chapter 8: The Library Beneath the Library. That night, as the spoon dreamed, the library shifted. A soft creak, a gentle sigh, as if the shelves themselves were stretching in their sleep. Below the floor, beneath the wood and dust and forgotten echoes, another library awoke. It was not a library of objects, nor of books, but of shadows. Each shadow rested on a shelf shaped like its former self. A shadow of a spoon. A shadow of a teacup. A shadow of a hat. A shadow of an umbrella. And though the real objects slept above, their shadows whispered below, speaking in a language made of echoes and almost sounds, words that hovered just outside meaning. I stirred once, whispered the shadow of the spoon. I held tea once, sighed the shadow of the teacup. I shaded heads once, murmured the shadow of the hat. I longed for rain once, breathed the shadow of the umbrella. The shadows leaned closer to one another, their edges blurring, their shapes softening, until they seemed to fold into one long, continuous sigh. Above, the spoon stirred slightly in its sleep, a tiny movement, like the ripple of a forgotten breeze. The librarian, standing quietly in the upper library, closed his eyes and listened. He could hear the shadows. He always had. In its dream, the spoon added a line to its diary, a line written not in ink, but in the gentle drift of its sleeping thought. Tonight I dreamed of shadows. They whispered beneath me. They carried memories I never knew were mine. It was a deep night. Outside the library, if outside could be reached from beneath, the breeze waited, silent and patient, as if unsure where to go next. Inside, the shadows settled back onto their shelves, and the floor above grew still again, holding both the weight and the lightness of everything unseen. Chapter 9: The Echoes Upstairs. Above the spoon, above the shelves, above the library that had always been, there was another library. It was not made of wood, nor stone, nor glass. It was made entirely of echoes. Each echo belonged to a sound that had once existed, and then forgotten how to fade. There were echoes of footsteps, gentle and slow. Echoes of pages turning, though no pages had ever turned here. Echoes of soft laughter, a chuckle that had no mouth to own it. The echoes moved quietly between invisible shelves, whispering along paths no one had mapped, folding into one another like waves that never crashed. The spoon, sleeping below, stirred faintly, as if the echoes brushed against its dreams. The librarian stood in the middle library, listening upward, listening downward, his ears full of sounds that weren't quite sounds, and yet were more than silence. "I hear them," he said softly, though no one had asked. The teacup tilted gently, the hat still resting on its rim, the brim now slightly luminous, as if the echoes had left a shimmer behind. "I think the echoes are watching." The teacup mused, its voice a delicate ripple. "Do echoes watch?" The spoon wondered aloud, still half dreaming, half awake. "Maybe they wait," the hat suggested, humming softly to itself. "Or maybe they remember," the umbrella added, its fabric unfolding just a little, as if stretching after a long, invisible sleep. The librarian closed his eyes, and a faint smile crept across his lips, small, quiet, like the shadow of a smile, rather than the smile itself. And in its diary, written softly inside the fold of a dream, the spoon added another line: "Tonight the echoes gathered above." They did not speak, but they were full of sound. It was an echoing night. Outside the library, if outside was somewhere the echoes could go, the breeze stirred, slow and uncertain, as if wondering whether to stay or follow the sound. Inside, the echoes settled back into their shelves, curling softly, ready to wait another night. Chapter 10: The Shelves Lean In. That night, or what the library believed was night, the shelves leaned in. Not in a rush, not in fear, but slowly, carefully, as if they had always meant to, but had simply forgotten until now. Each shelf tilted just enough to make the objects upon them draw closer, a gentle gathering, a quiet folding in. The spoon felt the shift, its silver curve reflecting the soft nearness of the teacup, the slight brim of the hat, the faint lines of the umbrella's folded fabric. "We are closer tonight," the teacup said, its voice like steam drifting without heat. "Yes," the spoon replied. "I think the shelves are listening." "Listening to what?" The hat wondered, its brim quivering faintly, as if catching a breeze no one else could feel. To themselves. The umbrella suggested, unfolding another invisible inch. The librarian stood still among the narrowing aisles, his hands at his sides, his head tilted, as if hearing a song only the shelves could hum. They are leaning in to hear what they've always held. He murmured, barely loud enough for the air to carry. The echoes above drifted lower, the shadows below rose higher, and somewhere between them, the shelves pressed just a little closer, until every object felt a gentle weight of being known. In its diary, written in the space where shelf met shelf, the spoon added another line. Tonight the shelves leaned closer. The teacup, the hat, the umbrella, we are near. The librarian heard it too. It was a quiet night. Outside the library, though outside was still a word waiting to be defined, the breeze curled itself around the building, content not to enter, content simply to be. Inside, the shelves held their closeness, their quiet, their stillness, as if nothing more needed to be added, and yet something more was always waiting. Chapter 11. The Waiting Silence. That night, or what the library believed was still night, a silence arrived. It did not creep, nor fall, nor drift. It simply settled, as if it had always been there, and had only just remembered itself. The silence wrapped itself around the shelves, coiled softly between the objects, rested gently on the spoon's curve, nestled in the teacup's hollow, folded into the hat's brim, and tucked beneath the umbrella's waiting fabric. The spoon noticed first. The silence is here. It thought, not speaking aloud, because words felt too loud for such quiet. The teacup felt it too, a warmth of stillness pooling inside, like tea that had never been poured, yet left a memory of flavor. The silence is waiting. The teacup thought, and wondered what it was waiting for. The hat hummed softly, but even its hum seemed smaller, as if the silence had asked it to whisper instead. The umbrella did not unfold, but felt the silence brush against its closed fabric, like a raindrop that never landed. The librarian walked once more, his steps slower than before, as if each footfall required permission from the hush. He paused before the spoon, before the teacup, before the hat, before the umbrella, and nodded gently, as if acknowledging the silence as an old friend. The echoes above paused their drifting, the shadows below paused their murmuring, and for a moment that stretched softly in every direction, the library simply waited. In its diary, written not with words but with stillness itself, the spoon added another line. Tonight the silence came. It wrapped around us, held us, waited with us. It was a waiting night. Outside the library, though outside was still a thought left unexplored, the breeze stopped moving, folding itself into the same waiting silence, joining without question. Inside, the silence breathed, slowly, quietly, and the shelves leaned just a little closer, as if listening for something only silence could say. Chapter 12. The Gentle Answer. And then, after the silence had waited long enough, something spoke. It was not a voice, not a word, not even a sound. It was an answer. The spoon felt it first, a warmth inside its curve, as if a question it had never asked had finally been gently answered. The teacup felt it too, a fullness, not of liquid, but of quiet understanding, spreading softly through its hollow. The hat felt it in its brim, a soft folding inward, like a sigh that meant nothing and everything at once. The umbrella felt it against its fabric, a breeze without movement, a raindrop that didn't fall, a stillness that spoke of waiting no longer. The librarian paused, his hands folded, his eyes closed, and he smiled a smile that wasn't exactly his, but belonged to the answer itself. Above, the echoes slowly faded, not gone, just resting. Below, the shadows curled into soft shapes, their edges blurring, their murmurs stilled. The shelves eased their lean, returning gently to their quiet, as if satisfied with what they had heard. The spoon breathed. Or something inside the spoon breathed. And in its diary, written not with ink, but with the tender presence of the answer, it added a new line. Tonight an answer came. No voice, no word, but I felt it. It was an answering night. The teacup tilted toward the spoon, the hat slipping slightly, settling more snugly against its rim. I think I understand. The teacup whispered. I think I do too. The spoon replied. The librarian opened his eyes, looked once more at each of them, and gave a nod so small, so quiet, that it felt like a punctuation mark at the end of an invisible sentence. Outside the library, though outside remained undefined, the breeze stirred again, gently, as if stretching after a long rest, ready to move onward. Inside, the objects settled, the shelves relaxed, and the answer remained, not needing to be spoken again. Chapter 13. The Night Before Morning. That night, or what the library believed was still night, a softness spread across the shelves. It wasn't a light, nor a shadow, nor a sound. It was the feeling of almost morning. The spoon rested, its curve quiet, its reflection calm, as if holding the last traces of the dream it had dreamed. The teacup tilted gently, the hat slipping slightly again, settling perfectly without trying. The umbrella unfolded a little more, not enough to open, just enough to stretch. The librarian walked slowly, his steps so soft they didn't disturb the softness, his hands folded behind his back, his gaze somewhere between seeing and remembering. We are waiting. The spoon thought, though it wasn't sure for what. We are ready. The teacup added silently, though it wasn't sure for what. The hat hummed, a low, steady hum, not of a song, but of the quiet before music. The umbrellas breathed together, their fabric rising and falling like a tide no one had seen. Above, the echoes watched from their shelves of sound. Below, the shadows curled beneath their shelves of memory. Everything leaned just slightly, as if listening for something not yet spoken, or perhaps something that had already been said. Long ago, quietly, and forgotten. The librarian paused in the center of it all, looked up, looked down, and whispered, almost. The spoon added a line to its diary, written in the soft space between night and what comes after. Tonight we waited. We felt the almost morning. We were quiet. It was a resting night. Outside the library, though outside remained a boundary no one crossed, the breeze circled, gentle, steady, as if tracing the outline of a door not yet opened. Inside, the shelves settled deeper, the objects folded into their shapes, and the night held its breath, waiting, waiting, waiting. Chapter 14: The Quiet Morning. And then, as softly as a sigh that had waited all night, morning came. It didn't burst, or blaze, or shout. It simply unfolded, like a blanket gently pulled back, revealing the same shapes beneath it, but in a light that hadn't been there before. The spoon stirred slightly, just a ripple of movement along its curve, as if greeting the newness without needing to change. The teacup tilted forward, the hat slipping fully into place, perfectly balanced now, as if it had always belonged there. The umbrella stretched one final inch, then rested, still folded, still waiting, but at peace. The librarian stood beside the window, though the window showed only the idea of outside, and watched the light fill the space. Between the shelves, between the echoes, between the shadows, between the waiting and the knowing. It is morning, he said, quietly, as if saying it made it true, or perhaps as if saying it made it stay. The spoon lifted its reflection toward the teacup. I think I might stir today. The spoon thought aloud, not a promise, not a plan, just a soft maybe, held gently in its curve. If you do. The teacup replied, it will be because you choose to, and not because you must. The hat gave a faint hum, a melody of morning without words. The umbrella folded a little tighter, content to wait for rain or not rain, whichever came first. The librarian turned from the window, his step slow, his smile quiet, and nodded once more at each of them, as if sealing the morning into place. And in its diary, written not with ink, not with thought, but with the soft presence of simply being, the spoon added a final line: today is morning. I am here. We are here. It is a quiet morning. Outside the library, Though outside remained undefined, the breeze moved onward, carrying nothing, carrying everything, carrying exactly what was needed, which, perhaps, was simply air. Inside, the library rested, the shelves rested, the objects rested, and the morning rested with them, soft, still, complete. Thank you for listening tonight. May your dreams be gentle, and your rest be kind.